So we're going to start talking about work-related attitudes. And when we talk about attitudes, we need to decide scientifically and empirically, and by empirically I mean in an objective way that we can measure it, what is an attitude? So whenever we're talking about any kind of personality traits or psychological constructs or attitudes or emotions, one of the things we need to determine is how do we actually measure these attitudes? Once we've measured them, what do those attitudes mean? And also then how can we apply it to the workplace? So when we talk about work-related attitudes, broadly speaking, we're talking about feelings that people have about their jobs, their organization, and the other people within that organization. And that can be the organization as a whole. That can be individual roles within their jobs. That can be elements of those roles. For example, someone might have very positive attitudes about the work they do, but fairly negative attitudes about how they're rewarded or how they're managed. They may actually very much enjoy the people they work with, but not necessarily the work that they do. So these are fairly complex attitudes. A lot of the times when we're talking about organizational behavior, we're often looking at just job satisfaction, and we're going to talk about that as well. But even job satisfaction can be multifaceted. In other words, there can be elements to it. We often measure it as a broad attitude. Broadly, are you satisfied with your work? But we can also look at it much more nuanced, and that's one of the things we're also going to talk as well, is how do we measure those nuances if that's what we're interested in. So generally, we often use the word attitude to refer to more as a kind of adjective for people. That person has attitude. But what we're really interested in here in this case is what exactly is the attitude? What makes up an attitude? How do we define an attitude? And finally, how does that, again, attitude relate to workplace behaviors? And you can probably just do a little thought exercise yourself of what your attitudes are towards school right this instant. So you can think about how you're feeling about school. Is it relevant? Do you enjoy education? Do you enjoy learning in classes? Or is it more of a long-term goal? I need to get a college degree to do the work I want. So even if I don't enjoy the classes, I still am focused on that final goal. Um, your attitudes may have also changed on your perceptions towards school and may actually even be different this time at this exact moment. So for example, if you'd been doing fairly well and suddenly you got back a paper grade that was much lower than you expected, that might cause a dip in your attitude towards school, or at least that class or that assignment at that particular time. I know my attitudes towards school were very different when I started as an undergrad and freshman. I was mainly focused on the freedom of being away from my parents, starting a new chapter in my life, being able to explore who I was. Honestly, classes and learning were pretty low on the list at that point. But later, as I started to realize what I wanted to do for a living and how education and also knowledge was going to help in that field, that also started to change my attitudes to being much more positive towards not only was I enjoying my classes more, this is information that I will use in my career, I also could see where that was leading, which again, of course, changed my attitudes. So let's talk a little bit more about what exactly an attitude is. So those basic definitions. An attitude is a relatively stable cluster of feelings, beliefs, and behavioral intentions towards a specific object, people, or institution. So there's a lot in that definition. So relatively stable. So if we're talking about an attitude, we're not necessarily talking about a mood or an emotional state. We're talking about a relatively stable. Now, it is going to be affected by our emotions and our moods. But broadly speaking, if you are generally satisfied with your work and nothing has really changed, you're probably going to stay relatively satisfied with your work over a long period of time. So that's that relatively stable. It's capturing more than just one thing. It's not just emotions or feelings. It's not just about beliefs or concepts or attitudes, and it's not necessarily even about behavior. It's a cluster of these things. So it's how we feel, what we think, and how we behave towards an object. So attitudes, again, much like emotions, do have something they're focused on. Whether that is we have attitudes about objects, you probably have fairly strong attitudes about some foods that you really like and some foods that you really don't like. We have attitudes about people. And again, some people we really like, some people we really aren't really that concerned with, and some people we may not like. And again, institutions, so where we work, organizations, etc. So pretty much anything can be the object, but it does need an object. And when you kind of think about it, if you really like someone, you have strong feelings, positive feelings towards them. You have strong beliefs. This is a person that I enjoy spending time with. This is a person I can trust. And because of that, your behavioral intentions, I like to spend time with this person. I'm more likely to make a hole in my schedule to allow me to do things with this person, and I'm more willing to help this person out. Those are all a part of attitudes. Likewise, if there was someone that we weren't very fond of, we'd have negative feelings. We generally don't like the person. We'd have a set of beliefs. I don't like this person because they don't share attitudes with me. They don't share activities that I like to do. I don't trust this person. I don't believe this person's reliable. And therefore, our behavioral intentions are going to be there as well. I try not to spend extra time with this person. I try to avoid this person if I can. And I don't really enjoy interactions. I don't go out of my way to spend time with this person. So you can kind of see how attitudes are not just feelings, beliefs, but also they affect how we behave. And because of that, they're very relevant to the workplace. And that's when we start talking about workplace or work-related attitudes. So attitudes relating to any aspect of the work or work setting. So basically the object of the attitude is something at work, whether it's an object at work, your computer, whether it's the people at work, or whether it's the work or the jobs or institutions that you do. So think about some examples of your attitudes towards some things at work. Do you have opinions? So, if you are currently employed, I want you to think about that place that you're employed at. If you're not employed, think about a particular class. Think about the boss or the instructor. What are your attitudes towards them? So what are your feelings? What are your beliefs? And because of those feelings and beliefs, does that impact your behavioral intentions? How about your coworkers? Who do you really like? Who do you really not necessarily like? And again, think about the feelings, beliefs, and attitudes. How about certain tasks of your job or the class? The times when you have to come into work. So how much flexibility do you have? Is there particular times where you're having to work on days that you are not very pleased with? All of these are going to result to attitudes. You can have attitudes about your supervisor. You can have your attitudes about your coworker. You can have your attitudes about the task of the job. You can have your attitudes about your scheduling and your flexibility. And you can even have attitudes about when you're working. So all of those are examples of attitudes. So when we talk about an attitude, we really want to think about that there's an object, the attitude object. There's an evaluative component, that's your emotionals. In other words, how do you evaluate the object? There's a cognitive component, what do you believe about the object? And then there's the behavioral component, how you're predisposed to act towards the object. Now recognize that these are not always necessarily going to result in perfect prediction. In other words, kind of think about it. You might hate your job. You might believe your job is a waste of time and that it has no real meaning, but your behavioral component, we'd expect then to fall in line. You're going to quit this job. But what if there's no other job that you can get currently and you're dependent on the money? So basically, all of these have to necessarily be connected. And generally, what we often do is we try to measure the evaluative, your feelings, the cognitive, what you believe, to predict the behavioral. But all three of these have constraints on how you actually end up behaving, because the behavioral component is not the actual behavior towards the attitude object, it's your predisposition to act in that situation. And it may be constrained strongly from the situation. So let me walk through one of my own personal examples. Don't judge me too harshly, but I am not a cat person. I am a dog person. So my evaluative component, so basically my emotions on this, is that I tend not to like cats. I'm not a very big fan of how they behave. I am a fairly strong extrovert for the most part. I like social groups, so I'm more drawn to a social animal like the dog. Cats tend to be loners, even though some cats aren't, but in general, I view them as loners. I don't have a very strong feeling. If I see a cat, I'm not going to be mean to it, but I also don't feel any like, oh, isn't that the cutest thing? It's just not there in me. The cognitive component, my thoughts and beliefs. I believe cats are evil. Uh, and I mean that in a very kind of loving way, in a weird way. But what I mean is that I've often believed that if you shrank me to 6 inches tall and put me in front of one of my large dogs, like some of my Labs or Great Danes, they would still recognize me as the pack leader. I would probably be safe. If you shrank me to 6 inches tall and put me in front of a cat that I owned, I'm pretty sure I would be a plaything and food. And therefore, my behavioral disposition is to not have cats. Now, having said that, I actually have quite a few cats at this point in my life. I have 2 indoor cats, I have 1 kind of half indoor cat, and then I also live on a horse ranch, and our barn has 4 cats that live there as well, and we take care of all of them. We feed them, we care for them, we make sure that they're comfortable, and they all are a part of my lives. But this all started with Derby, who is pictured here, And Derby was the first cat to make its way into my house. And so if you had asked, would this person ever adopt a cat? Well, if you looked at my evaluative component, my cognitive component, my behavioral component, it would have been no, no, no. However, the reality is this little monster wormed its way into my heart. And in fact, it's sitting on my lap right now as I'm recording this lecture, lightly purring. So let's move to one of the biggest types of attitudes that we tend to want to measure and consider when we're talking about workplace situations, and that's the job satisfaction. Job satisfaction typically is considered a positive emotional state resulting from one's appraisal, effective reactions, and attitudes towards one job. So again, that appraisal, how we feel, that effective reactions, how we think, and our attitudes, and then again, the cognition or behavior. Job satisfaction takes into account our feelings, our beliefs, and our behaviors towards a job. So there's no real difference in any of the attitudes we've talked now. We're just looking at a specific type of attitude. We do find some broad findings in job satisfaction. People with more experience in their job tend to actually have more job satisfaction. But we actually know probably the chances are is there's multiple factors involved here. Social factors, the longer and more experienced you are in the job, probably you have a better social network with the other people you work with. You probably have a better understanding of their positives and negatives. You probably are better rewarded. The longer you've been on your job, usually you are being paid more. And finally, one of the big predictors of not being satisfied with a job is role ambiguity, not knowing what you're supposed to do. And again, the more experience you have in a job, the less likely you have job or role ambiguity. Men and members of majority groups do also tend to have greater job satisfaction. And again, when we think about this, it may be a function of career goals and may also be a function of pay. If you're in a group that traditionally actually is slightly more likely to be promoted, slightly more likely to get higher advantage or more prestigious jobs or tasks, and also statistically speaking is paid slightly more, all of those are going to result in possibly greater job satisfaction. There's also a big predictor that those are just predispositioned towards being satisfied. So remember that positive affect? We're seeing it again. People that have a positive affect tend to also have higher job satisfaction. People with negative affect tend to look at the kind of the not the so bright side of life, would tend to also have a lower job satisfaction. Also, we find older people have spent a great deal of time at getting where they are, also tend to have more job satisfaction. So age, experience, majority group membership, and a predisposition towards positive affectivity all result in typically higher job satisfaction. There's also some cultural elements, and again, when I'm talking about all of these, recognize that none of this is a single snapshot picture of what's actually going on. There's a lot of factors that go into job satisfaction and a lot of possible reasons why different groups are differentially affected. And knowing that, for instance, people that have been in their job role longer have more job satisfaction doesn't mean that everyone that has been in their job longer has higher satisfaction. There's always going to be exceptions to those rules. And there's going to be exceptions as well when we look at geography and cultures. But when we look at satisfaction by country, we do find that certain countries tend to have a greater job satisfaction. And a lot of times when we look at these countries, they're also looking at countries that also have a fair amount of social protection of workers. In other words, there are benefits, there is retirement plans, and often we're looking at countries that tend to pay their workers well or have a booming economy currently. When we look at countries that actually have the lowest satisfaction of workers, we can also see that it might be cultural, but there's also some other factors there as far as the growth of their economy, resources that they're able to get, and pay rates as well. So there's several theories of job satisfaction, and all of them are somewhat supported. And I think depending on what you're interested in looking at and measuring, you can use a lot of these models. So one of them is the social information processing model. It's the conceptualization that people adopt attitudes and behaviors in keeping with the cues provided by others with whom they come into contact. So what people say at work can affect the job satisfaction of those around them. So basically, it's the idea that we tend to adopt the attitudes and behaviors based on other cues. So for instance, if we're happy and the people that are around us are happy, we're more likely to stay happy. But that also tends to cluster. And as we start to go out, we might find that people that are less connected to our groups are a little less happy. And as we move further away, the people that have connection to those people that are less happy might be even less happy. So this tends to be kind of a domino effect. You can have happiness that spreads throughout an organization. You can also have happiness or job satisfaction that's kind of siloed into small groups. Some groups are very satisfied, some groups are not. But one of the first things we want to look at if we're trying to predict why are some people unsatisfied is it may also be the people that they're around. Think about if you have a particular cluster of employees that all have negative affect, not only are they inclined towards lower job satisfaction, if those are the people they also constantly interact with, they're constantly having that opinion kind of reinforced. If you are positive affect and you generally look at the bright side of life and work and you're happy and the people around you are also positive affect, again, you can see that kind of spreading. So this is basically kind of a social contagion theory. It's the belief that a part of job satisfaction is also the satisfaction of others around you. It's one of the reasons that a lot of organizations put some time and effort into trying to make sure that everyone is positive, if you will. They're smiling, they're talking positively about the organization, and a lot of organizational communication is about trying to make sure that people stay relatively satisfied to get this kind of contagion effect. That satisfaction is then reflected in even those that may not have the same reasons to be satisfied. There's also a dispositional model, and this is basically strongly tied to that idea of positive and negative affect. As I said, attitudes tend to be relatively stable over time, and we find that as well with job satisfaction. In other words, if you are on average tending to be satisfied with your work, you'll actually tend to be satisfied at other times as well, and maybe even in other jobs. So people that generally are highly satisfied with their work tend to be highly satisfied no matter what the conditions are. And those that are dissatisfied with their work across all, if we equal everything out, are also inclined to be negatively affected or have a negative job satisfaction wherever they go. So a fair amount of research has looked at this dispositional model, and it is not the only model of job satisfaction, but it has found that there's an individual element. So if you can kind of start putting things together, the previous slide was about the social impact of others' job satisfaction on our own. The dispositional model is about our own personal trait of personality, negative and positive affect, and how it applies to our own job satisfaction. So when we start talking about measuring job satisfaction, there is a lot of methods to measure job satisfaction. If we really want detailed information, we may want to look at an interview. We could also look at survey data. So we could ask people about their job satisfaction. And both interviews and surveys can be very quick and easy. So an interview might just be, are you satisfied with your job? And if so, why? If you're not satisfied with your job, if so, why? A survey could simply be on a 1 to 5 scale, how satisfied are you with your job? 1 dissatisfied, 5 satisfied. But we might also try to break that apart into questions, both in the interview or survey, that also ask about your coworkers, your most preferred coworker, your least preferred coworker, the tasks that you do, your pay, your benefits, your management, the organization as a whole. Because if we just give someone a broad, are you satisfied, it will give us a quick pulse of the organization. In fact, we might be able to say, across 100 employees on a 1 to 5 scale, our job satisfaction is a 4.25. Well, that sounds pretty good. But if someone has a 2, we really don't know why they have a 2. We just know they're dissatisfied. If we ask those further questions, we might go, this is a management issue. They were generally 3s and 4s on most things, but when we asked them about management, it was all 1s. And when we asked them about their overall satisfaction, they put a 2. So the more we ask, the more detailed information we can get. There are other methods to measure job satisfaction because both of those require the person to be willing to share truthfully how they feel. And again, I know I've often felt pressure, especially when I get a job satisfaction survey from an internal organization within an organization that I'm a part of, when my email is clearly a part of it. In other words, they know who's responding. I tend to be a little more positive than I probably would in those situations. So there is some issues when we just ask people about their job satisfaction. The other methods we can look at is their actual behaviors. So if we're looking across an organization and we see that one particular part of the organization has a lot more absenteeism, a lot more people leaving the organization, and a lot more difficulty hiring new people, that might be an indication as well that there's a job satisfaction problem within that particular facet of the organization. Finally, I've already kind of alluded to this in our previous discussion, but there's also global versus facet measure of job satisfaction. Global means it's simply a single measure. How satisfied are you? Facets are those factors or those components. So what are the individual components of satisfaction, and is that what we're measuring? So I'm just going to go over a few job satisfaction measures that are commonly used. The first one is the JDI, the Job Descriptive Index. It's a rating scale for assessing job satisfaction, and individuals respond to this questionnaire. So it's a survey indicating whether or not various adjectives describe aspects of their work. So again, it's getting a kind of facets. It's looking at why is there issues, if there are, with the job satisfaction the person is expressing. The Minnesota Satisfaction Questionnaire, the MSQ, is a rating scale for assessing job satisfaction in which people indicate the extent to which they are satisfied with various aspects on the job. So the JDI is more about inferring. There's a little bit of, I wouldn't call it deception, but if you're filling it out and you're basically rating these adjectives, it's basically inferring that the more positive adjectives that you rate highly, the more satisfied you are with the work. The more negative adjectives you endorse highly, the less satisfied you are. The Minnesota Satisfaction Questionnaire goes straight to the question. It basically asks, how satisfied are you with work? How satisfied are you with the primary tasks? How satisfied are you with management? So if you were pretty much sure that your population would be willing to share their true feelings, I think the Minnesota Satisfaction Questionnaire is a fine tool to use. If you're a little worried that people might be a little deceptive and unwilling to give specific details, the JDI might actually be a better measure because it has a little less direct connection. You're not asked specifically how you rate your manager, but you are asked to pick out and rate adjectives that describe management. So again, just something to consider when you're thinking about measuring job satisfaction. And then, of course, there's many specific facet questionnaires out there, and this is one example, the Pay Satisfaction Questionnaire. It's a questionnaire designed to assess employees' level of satisfaction with various aspects of pay. It basically asks people to respond on a 1 to 5 scale, extremely dissatisfied to extremely satisfied, to just various questions about pay. For example, current level of pay, size of the salary, typical raise rate, satisfaction with how raises are determined, etc. So again, we could, instead of just asking, are you satisfied with pay, if we found in a broader survey, for example, the Minnesota questionnaire, that we had lower ratings on pay satisfaction, but why are they lower? We might then follow it up with the pay satisfaction questionnaire. We can also look at critical incident techniques. So this could be done in a survey, have people filling out blocks of data, but it's definitely going to require some interpretation. It could also be done in an interview. It's a procedure for measuring job satisfaction in which employees describe incidents related to their work that they find especially satisfying or dissatisfying. So what do you find most satisfying at work? So for example, that's when we take a look to see what people write. What do you find least satisfying? The advantage here is that we're not forcing people to respond to preconceived notions of job satisfaction. So again, we may get some more detailed information. The downside to using techniques like this is sometimes it's a little bit harder to look for patterns or find answers. And of course, we can also just go straight to an interview, questioning people in person about why they're at what about their attitudes in order to explore them more deeply. The why. So you said you were unsatisfied with your manager, but why are you unsatisfied with your manager? We often will see this more in exit and retention interviews. So an exit interview occurs when someone leaves the organization. Retention occurs periodically while people are within the organization. And these techniques can help an organization identify issues in the company that potentially address. So again, if someone's leaving, why are you leaving? And the idea behind an exit interview, by the way, is that we're expecting people to be a little more honest, potentially negatively honest, about what it was that made them unsatisfied that resulted in them leaving. And sometimes we actually get information that there was no problem with satisfaction. It's simply they had a life event or a family event, or just they got a much better offer. So we can also get that as well out of these retention and exit interviews. So another theory is the value theory, and it basically suggests that job satisfaction depends primarily on the match between the outcomes individuals value in their job and the perceptions about the availability of such outcomes. Basically, give people what they want and they'll be satisfied. So this is a discrepancy theory. It basically says that every individual has a list of outcomes that they value, and that may vary from individual to individual. Some individuals may be very money focused. They could care less about benefits or even flexibility. They just want to make sure they're making as much money as possible for the hours they put in. Other people might be less concerned with money and more concerned with benefits, flexibility, etc. So whatever that person's individual value is, we then ask, are they actually perceiving that they are getting those outcomes? If they are, we'd expect them to be satisfied. If they aren't, that's discrepancy. They would probably be dissatisfied. So again, if someone's value, so if we look at Jill and basically their values are low on pay but high on healthcare and high on flexibility, and there's no discrepancy. So they don't get much pay. So again, the pay is low, but also that effect is low. However, whether they get good healthcare and good flexibility are both high. So for this particular individual, we'd expect high job satisfaction because their needs, healthcare and flexibility, are being met. But if we were just looking at pay, we might expect the person to be dissatisfied because it would be lower than we'd expect. And this is the idea of value theory. It's not just enough to know or basically throw money at a problem or throw benefits at a problem. It has to be tailored to the individual for it to truly work. Sometimes that's very possible in organizations. Sometimes it's kind of hard to do, but it is another way to look at job satisfaction. And again, we look at James here. His desire is for high pay, medium care about health care, and low. And again, we see the effects. So if he's not being paid well, we expect a strong effect on job satisfaction. That's where he's going to be impacted the most. If he is getting high pay, if he's getting okay health care, and if he doesn't have flexibility, we'd still expect good job satisfaction. But if he was getting low pay, high health care, and high flexibility, even though he's getting a lot of benefits, we'd expect that job satisfaction to be lower. So I want to end on one last theory. And like I said, all of these theories are supported and all of them look at job satisfaction in different ways because it is a highly complex concept. And the theory that we'd apply really depends on what we're interested in doing. Whenever I look at a theory, what I like to look at is what kind of information does the theory give me? How can I use that information? And what kind of levers does it give me to change or positively impact the interest, the variable of interest, in this case, job satisfaction? So the two theory factor basically suggests that job satisfaction and job dissatisfaction come from a different group of variables or predictors. And basically this is called motivators and hygiene factors. So hygiene factors predict job dissatisfaction and motivators affect job satisfaction. So if we're wanting to make someone satisfied, promotion opportunities, the more promotion opportunities are, the more likely the person is going to stay satisfied. And we actually see this in a lot of organizations. One of the kind of most current trends is a lot of organizations are creating lots of mid-level promotions. So for example, if the company used to have 5 main levels, you started as an entry-level employee, you then went to a junior consultant, then a senior consultant, then a partner. There now might be senior consultant 1, 2, and 3. There might be junior consultant 1, 2, and 3. And each one of those would be a small little promotion upwards, but it provides more promotion opportunities. Opportunities for personal growth, recognition, responsibility, and achievement. All of those we'd expect for most people would result in higher job satisfaction. And if they didn't have these, we'd probably expect lower job satisfaction. But what's also worth measuring is job dissatisfaction. It's almost a separate concept, and that's what this theory suggests. And the hygiene factors that affect this include quality of supervision, pay, the company's policies, physical working conditions, relations with other, and job security. So for example, you could be very satisfied with your motivators, but you don't like your manager, you don't think you're paid enough, and you're not very fond of your company's policies. That would be someone with high overall job satisfaction. In other words, their job itself is resulting in satisfaction of the work, but job dissatisfaction, broadly speaking. That would be someone we'd actually expect to be a flight risk, someone that'd be likely to leave the company. So basically the idea is that when we're looking at job satisfaction, especially from a long-term retention viewpoint, we need to be addressing both. We first need to make sure that those hygiene factors are there. And the reason that they're different and they're in their separate category is that someone that has a decent manager, is happy with their pay, is okay with their company policies, is in decent physical working conditions. In other words, they're comfortable and they don't feel endangered. They have a decent relation with people around them and they feel like their job is secure. those all result in someone that is unlikely to be dissatisfied, but and it's a good predictor of whether someone's going to try to leave the company, but it's not necessarily a good predictor of high performance and enjoying the work. And that's where job satisfaction comes in. So we're going to pick up a little bit more on how we apply these to the workplace and some of the impacts that job satisfaction has on workplace behavior in the next module.